Welcome to Oz Talk. Today we're going from page to screen, comparing the original L. Frank Baum book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, to the MGM classic adaptation starring Judy Garland, and all the differences in between. We're going to mention as many as we have found in the comments. Please leave any other changes that you've noticed, and send us some ideas of what you'd like to see in upcoming Oz Talk episodes. This show is brought to you by the Oz Club. Since the 1950s, the International Wizard of Oz Club has been bringing fans together. Go to ozclub.org to join. When we look at the book and comparing to the movie, there's so many differences. I mean, some are glaring and some, have become iconic and really changed the fabric of what the Wizard of Oz seems to be. But let's just go over some of them, starting with in Kansas. We see some characters pop up in Kansas that are not in the original book. Right, Julius? Who do we see in Kansas that's in the movie that's not in the book?
Of course, we all know Hickory, Hunk, and Zeke, which we all know has become the other three in Oz, though. So we get to see them in their kind of Kansas form. So as amongst other things. And then, of course, Toto, Professor Marvel, and of course, though, we all know him to be Oz, though. So, of course, Professor Marvel.
It really works because when you're adapting from page to screen, you obviously are going to have to take some liberties. And one of the things with the MGM concept, which I know we'll get to, is this whole it's a dream that Dorothy's sort of working through all of these emotions and learning the very valuable lesson. So by having the people from the real world paralleling, it's very much like what you have in your own dreams. So it gives you the in with Dorothy. It gives you the in to this world. And while it's certainly not a faithful adaptation by any stretch, it's necessary for the way MGM is choosing to tell the story. And it works. And it's an idea that began way back with Peter Pan, with Mr. Darling inevitably becoming Captain Hook, as the kids sort of, particularly Wendy, sort of faces the concept of growing up. So it's a literary tradition that's been around for a while, and MGM capitalized some on that to create their world.
It is very interesting. Zoe, I'm wondering, what do you find of that? I mean, we always say that books are better than the movie, but I would argue that The Wizard of Oz is one case where the movie is even better than the book. What would you say?
I think it's too hard to say that one's better than the other, because it's like that old saying, you're comparing apples to oranges. This is comparing Munchkins to Winkies. They're both great. So Wonderful Wizard of Oz is, in my mind, as perfect a book as a book can be, and the film is as perfect a film as a film can be. And really comparing them, other than, looking, did the movie tell the story of the book, which I think it did, I think comparing them too hard is almost just doing them both a disservice, because they both fit so well into their particular medium. So I don't think one's better than the other. I think they're both perfect in their own right. I sound like my mom.
No, that's really, really good. I might be biased. I came to Oz through the movie first, but also one of the things that the movie has that I just can't separate from Oz, and what I think of it is are the songs, So Tori, what do you think about that change? I mean, there's a musicality certainly in Baum's writing, and he often has characters, when we think of like the Patchwork Girl doing poetry or silly rhymes. But what do you think about the music and the songs in The Wizard of Oz that was not in the book?
It felt like a very natural thing to do to make The Wizard of Oz, the film, a musical. Like you said, L. Frank Baum's writing is very musical in itself. And his characters had their own little limericks that were actually songs. Also, he made several musicals himself, touring musicals out of his books. So it felt like a very natural progression. Also, you have to kind of put the film in its historical context. This was made during World War II. People needed a pick-me-up. And they made that dream element to make it more believable to a Depression-era audience. So it was an uplifting thing for a very war-torn and tired audience to enjoy.
Absolutely. And then, when we move on from Kansas in the book and we get to Oz for the first time, Dorothy's house lands. This is all on the Wicked Witch of the East. This is all very familiar and similar. The Munchkin landscape is quite different in the book than it appears in the film. But the other major note is we see a distinctive, different Good Witch of the North and South. Zoe, tell us about that.
So in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, there's actually two good witches that Dorothy meets throughout her journey. There's the Good Witch of the North who greets her in Munchkinland, who is described as a little old woman, not much taller than the Munchkins herself. And then later in the book, Dorothy has to journey to the South to see Glinda. And the big difference is the Good Witch of the North is this little old woman who has some magic, but even describes herself as not being so powerful, whereas Glinda is the all-knowing, all-powerful sorceress. So that we see these two distinctly different characters. When they just made the MGM film, they decided to save some time in the narrative and condense the two good witches into one. So they both serve the purpose of the Good Witch of the North and Glinda. But I think it's interesting. A lot of people will say that it's Glinda given the North direction to her title. But I really would argue that it's the Good Witch of the North's character just with Glinda's name piled on top.
Mm-hmm. And the original book was illustrated by W.W. Denslow, and I love his illustrations, and they're also very true to the text. So, for example, the shapes of the Tin Man and the Scarecrow appear very different in the book and in the text and the illustrations versus how they look in the film. Garrett, what do you make of that?
A scarecrow is a scarecrow. And while some of the makeup tests early on for Ray Bolger were much more in line with, say, what Neil and Denslow had done, you're still trying to put them on face and human features. And likewise with the Tin Woodsman, he's primarily, he's built out of tin. He doesn't have normal human limbs. And you can't do that on a human frame. So they adapted it to fit specific individuals. While at the same time, the other thing they were shying away from was earlier in the 30s, there was an Alice in Wonderland adaptation that went whole hog, John Tenniel's illustrations, massive masks. You couldn't recognize the actors, and it was a massive flop. And they were very cognizant that, especially in these days, fantasy films were not what they are now. So they needed to make sure that you still could go, oh, yes, that is a person in there. Yes, this is normal. And I think that's part of why they also went the musical route. If you've got fantasy, go full on fantasy. And I mean, people normally don't just burst out into song and dance. Myself excluded, but you don't have a lot of that in the real world. So I think they look different from Denslow and Neil, but that's because you're trying to apply it to physical humans, and there's only so much.
Right. What I was getting at, not so much the makeup, but more the characterization in terms of the Scarecrow was wearing Munchkin clothes, so he was no larger than a Munchkin. And the same as the Tin Man was a Munchkin being before becoming of tin. So their size would have been closer to Dorothy. That's just what I meant, is that Ray Bolger and Jack Haley were, more adult human size. But you're right. I think I love that they chose to go with actual, makeup on human faces so that we saw all the emotion of the great casting there.
I just wanted to point out that very cognizant in people's minds as well at this time was the adaptation that L. Frank Baum had done on the stage. People were very familiar with the designs of these characters as they looked on stage. This was still very fresh in people's memory. So they did try to model the look off of Fred Stone as well.
That's a really great point. And that's very true.
In there.
No, you're right, because like in today we all are very familiar with Wicked, and that's fresh in our head, the Elphaba and the depiction of Glinda there. So that's a really, really good point. Moving through Oz, there are a bunch of characters that are cut out, right, Julius? Who are some of the characters that our friends meet along the way to the Emerald City that we don't see on screen?
Collidas, where they meet in the forest. I'm just glad some things are meant in books. So some things that will probably, I can imagine a director, like if they get over some of the creatures in Oz, though, that they can actually be on screen, it will be very, very scary.
Tori, I think the most famous change that has become so iconic in the film is the ruby slippers, right? Because in the book, they're not ruby. What are they?
They're silver in the book. And of course, as we all know, they changed them to ruby slippers from silver to highlight the amazing new technology of Technicolor. And they were working within a very limited structure of technological advances in film. They could not have pulled off the field mice or anything like that. But what they did utilize was color, and they took full advantage of the broad, colorful landscapes that L. Frank Baum described in his text. And they took those slippers and they just made them pop. That red against the yellow. I don't know about you guys, but when I see those two colors together, the first thing that always pops into my head is the MGM film. So they really took advantage of the technology they did have, and they made it pop off of the screen with those amazing colors.
It's so true. And when we get to the Emerald City, Zoe, we meet the wizard. Our friends go in, and in the book, it is quite different than how the foursome go in together, right? Tell us what happens there.
So in the novel, the wizard only agrees to see them one at a time. And this is because, he's trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So I think seeing them individually, he can trick them into not really believing what they're seeing or hearing because they have such different stories when they leave. So it makes them seem all powerful. So Dorothy sees the oversized head that we know is the iconic Wizard of Oz image. However, when the Scarecrow went in, he saw a beautiful lady, and the Tin Woodman saw a gigantic beast, and the Cowardly Lion saw a talking great ball of fire, which is scary in and of itself. So I think he was really, like I said, he was trying to pull the wool over their eyes. So he appeared in different forms to make himself seem like he's so powerful he can be whatever he wants. And when they return from killing the Wicked Witch, he actually appears invisible, which I think is really, he didn't expect them to come back alive. So he kind of was just making it up as he went along.
I also think it's one of those things that just in condensing the book for time, because back in 1930s they weren't doing The Wizard of Oz Part 1 and Part 2 like they do for famous books today, right? Mm-hmm. So they didn't want to have a 4-hour movie, so they had to edit things down. Garrett, they similarly did that with The Winged Monkeys and that chapter of the book. What's different from page to screen there?
Well, when they go to find and ultimately destroy the Wicked Witch, she first sends a flock of crows, she sends wolves, bees, she sends her own Winkies, and then finally, in desperation, she sends the flying monkey or the winged monkeys. And on screen, again, like you said, it's a condensation for time. You don't need to see the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion all go up against things for the Wicked Witch. You just got to get to the Wicked Witch. And so they, by doing that, it moves the story along quicker. And again, you're working with about 100 and some odd minutes for a film. So you're working against time. Where's a place to trim the fat? And that's one of the better places to trim it.
The movie just ends when the wizard departs the Emerald City, but in the book, they travel more through Oz. Garrett, you want to talk us through that?
After the wizard leaves, Dorothy first tries to get the flying monkeys to take her back to Kansas, which they aren't able to do. But they advise her to go see Glinda in the South. And she then spends another couple of chapters trekking from Emerald City through the southern quabbling country of Oz before she finally reaches Glinda. And then bing, bang, boom, Glinda tells her how to get home. But that would have been so unnecessary because the emotional journey that particularly the MGM Dorothy has gone on is to make the realization of there's no place like home, and she's lost her chance to continue on. It's just unnecessary and in some ways kind of unwieldy. So having Glinda then pop up with her, well, here's the message all tied up nice and neat, works much better on screen than doing a whole drawn out third act would.
Zoe, in the book, the Wicked Witch of the West doesn't even appear until later in the story, right? Whereas in the movie, we see her right away in Munchkinland.
Yes, that's right. In The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, she doesn't appear until chapter 12, I believe it is, and she's completely crammed into that chapter. And that's the only time we hear from her. Also, she's not green. I mean, she could be, but we never hear that. It's not in the text. And in Denslow's illustrations, everyone's skin is already yellow. So she's kind of an off yellow color. So maybe that's where MGM thought maybe she was meant to be green. But she's not a very formidable enemy. I love in the movie, they've expanded her. They put her earlier in the film and we see her throughout so that there's a constant threat. Whereas in the book, the only threat to Dorothy until she has to go see the witch is getting home. That's her number one threat. And also the witch, it's important to note, Dorothy has to face the witch alone in the book. Her friends do not come after her. And she actually ends up just killing the witch because she gets so mad at her, she just throws the bucket on her out of frustration.
So true. And she looks quite different. She's also more Dorothy's size. She's got a patch on her eye. She carries an umbrella instead of a broom. So there are a lot of differences there. It's true. And Garrett, there's also that difference in getting to the Emerald City where we see snow in the movie that Glinda brings to help them through the poppy field. But we don't get that in the book.
Well, it's a holdover, like Tori mentioned earlier. The 1902 stage musical was still very prevalent in people's minds, and that's a device from the stage musical. They didn't have field mice. The Good Witch of the North in the stage version comes in and drops snow on the poppies, and then there's a big ballet, I believe. And that's a holdover from that. I mean, you're on the MGM lot. You're certainly not going to release a ton of mice on anybody's set. So, hey, we've got the solution here. Let's bring in the snow from the stage version.
And Tori, I really believe that because the film goes that way, we see Dorothy really grow and learn something. I mean, that's kind of the magic in the screenplay, right? What's the lesson Dorothy learns in the film?
She possessed everything that she needed to succeed in life inside of her all along. Really, in the context of the MGM film, in which it's a dream and these characters are manifested from people she knew in her real life, what she's coming to realize is that the people that surround her really make her whole, that she has everything that she needs already at home, and that the people that she surrounds herself with, her family, really complete the package. And I think that's what we all really come to find. Whether it's people we're born into, a family we're born into, or the friends that we make along the way, we really build ourselves from the inside out. And most of what we think we need to look for is already there. And Dorothy's journey is really a journey of self-actualization and fulfillment.
And it's a really good lesson. I think that's why it still resonates so well with people all over. And, you know, I think people that love the movie or see Wicked or other productions of The Wizard of Oz or incarnations, adaptations, it does draw them back to the books. When we move past The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, do you guys have picks for your favorite of Baum's original writing?
For me, after you get outside of Wizard, my two favorites are probably both Patchwork Girl, which in a lot of ways is kind of Wizard reinvented. There's a lot of like ties points that are similar. I really love The Lost Princess of Oz, where Ozma goes missing and they go on this mystery adventure to rescue her. But I also really love The Road to Oz, which is really kind of all about loving Oz and getting to Oz and just loving Oz for being Oz. So there's a lot of the books that are great, but I think those are probably the three strongest for me of the post-Wizard books.
My favorite outside of Wonderful Wizard is actually Marvelous Land, which is the second. And it gets some flack. Like, a lot of people say you can tell Baum was writing for the stage when he wrote Marvelous Land. And it is clear, but I think as a theater person, I've always loved that. I love seeing, okay, an army of girls. He was planning a chorus line and seeing all these different things. And with Scarecrow being my favorite character, he had such a front and center role in this story. So that's one of the reasons I love it. And then I also really love Ozma, which is book number 3, because that's the book where Dorothy comes back for the first time. And it's really great to see her reunite with her friends for the first time and see them reconnect. And that just leads us on to all the adventures that they have throughout the rest of the series.
So you must be a big Return to Oz fan then.
I am. I do. And I think that they did a really good job marrying those two books into one storyline.
Ozma Oz and Patchwork Girl of Oz, though, because Patchwork Girl to me is kind of a person that should be in the films at some point, though, because she's so. I just like her. I like her. I like Patchwork Girl. Like outside of the main characters, though, she's one of my favorite ones, though, too. So
Marvelous Land is definitely one of my favorite post The Wonderful Wizard of Oz books. I love seeing Tip become Ozma. Again, self-actualization and the journey to finding who you really are. Just groundbreaking stuff in literature. And also, Emerald City of Oz is definitely one of my favorites. It was the book that was meant to wrap up the series, tie up all the loose ends. At that point, L. Frank Baum was like, I'm done with this stuff. And he tried to let the sun set on the Land of Oz from his point of view. Of course, his readers demanded more and he went bankrupt, so he had to undo a lot of those tied up, nice, tidy endings. But I love watching Uncle Henry and Annie M move to Oz and discover all of the things that Dorothy has been telling them about all this time. It's so fun to watch them meet all of her friends and get integrated into the Land of Oz.
That is really spectacular. And I think playing off of that and the spirit of Baum wanting to get out of Oz, he wrote Rinc-A-Tink. And that's a book that very decidedly is not an Oz book. And then he kind of just throws Oz in at the very end and puts Of Oz in the title to kind of make it an Oz book. And interestingly, that really, really appealed to me as a child when I read it. So that stands out as one of my favorites. And then I also really enjoyed Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. But for some reason, when I reread it, because I remembered it being a favorite as a child, but I reread it recently and I was like, why did I like this so much? I mean, it's a great book. It's still a great adventure that I think there's a lot of scary stuff to it. Maybe it's because I'm a vegetarian. I don't know. But that's an interesting book too. It's interesting how we all have kind of a lot of different picks. I mean, overall, there's 14 great Oz Baum books for everyone to enjoy. And we're all recommending them very clearly here, right?
And don't overlook the short stories as well, because Toto finally gets his say in the short stories. So definitely check this out.
And Baum's last book, honestly, is another really phenomenally well-written book, Glinda of Oz. And it lays a lot of groundwork for modern science fiction and speculative fiction. And it's a fantastic read. And it really, they're basically all fairly solid. Rinc-A-Tink is great up until he shoehorned in Dorothy at the end. But I mean, they're all well worth your time and effort to read, for sure.
Well, thank you, everybody. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate everyone's time. It's great seeing you. Please like, share, leave comments for us. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about in an upcoming episode of Oz Talk. And Zoe, tell us how people can join the Oz Club.
You can join the Oz Club just by going to www.ozclub.org. And you can also get more information on our virtual events and conventions by visiting ozconvention.org. It's quick and easy. You just click a few buttons and you can pay with PayPal. If you're not a person that carries their credit card around, you can join the club so easily. It's affordable and it's fun and worth every penny.